He paid extra for silence and traded it for a lullaby. 10 minutes after takeoff from Minneapolis, the quiet cocoon of 2A split on a soft seam. Someone in coach was singing in Spanish, not to the cabin, but to a feverish child. The melody threaded through the engine hum like a careful stitch. Clean vowels, no showmanship. Reed Langston, who trusted numbers more than noises, found his eyes no longer scanning the dosing table in front of him. He looked toward the curtain, surprised to feel the tug of a voice that was not calling him at all. A cart rattled. A flight attendant mispronounced the dinner option into embarrassment. "Farfelli?" she tried. The singer, still unseen, corrected without heat. "Farfall." The sound of the word in the right shape was the smallest of mercies. Reed pressed the call button. "Is there a reason I can't sit in row 18? He asked when the attendant arrived. She blinked, then glanced at his seat number. "Sir, that's Coach." "I'm aware," he said, already closing his laptop. "I'd like to change seats." He carried his coat past the curtain and into air that was warmer with people. 2 rows down, a young woman with a tired braid and a coffee stain on her sleeve cradled a sleeping boy whose damp curls clung to her collarbone. She occupied 18F like a harbor. Body turned to keep the child steady, voice turned low to keep the world from waking him. When Reed dropped into the middle seat beside her, she lifted her eyes for a single assessing second, then dropped them again to the boy. She didn't ask why he was there. He didn't explain. Turbulence mumbled underfoot. The boy stirred and whimpered. The woman shifted languages as if changing keys. French this time, the lullaby rounding into a different tenderness. Reed thought, absurdly, of how his teams debated whether dose-limiting toxicity should be footnoted or framed, while this stranger adjusted a vowel and changed a child's temperature by a degree of calm. When the seatbelt sign dimmed, he spoke, not with small talk, but with paper. "Istanbul," he said, sliding a stapled packet to her armrest. "Clinical trial consent, English to Turkish." "Something's off." Most people would have demurred. She took the packet in her free hand and let her eyes land, not skim. In 15 seconds, her pen circled a line like a surgeon's mark. "This term signals medication," she murmured, "but the sentence describes therapy. If you leave it, a family expects a pill and gets a plan. That's not a translation failure. That's a promise that breaks trust." He blinked. It wasn't on any of the flag lines. He realized, with a jolt that felt suspiciously like relief, how rare it was to be surprised without being endangered. "You studied Turkish?" "I studied language," she said. Turkish was one of the 7 that wouldn't leave me alone. He waited because silence made people honest. She filled in the edges without performance. "Camille," she said, nodding toward the child. "This is Noah." "Reed," he answered, and heard how rarely his name was a first sentence, rather than the last line of a biography someone else recited at him. "Your vowel harmony is good," she added almost conspiratorially. "For a terrified consent form." He smiled before he could stop himself. "I don't terrify on purpose." "Language sometimes does the job for us," she said. They flew east through weather that couldn't make up its mind. The older woman in 18D turned once, tears brightening her accent as she said in Italian that she had not heard that lullaby since Naples. Camille answered in the same language. 2 sentences, a soft smile, and the woman touched her wrist, grateful. Reed watched, not the exchange itself, but the frictionless ease with which Camille let strangers remain strangers without keeping them out. He tested his next sentence for a full minute before saying it. "I have a meeting tomorrow at 10. Partners from 3 countries, regulators and a 4th. 4 languages planned, at least 1 unplanned. We're going to try to make new work sound safe without lying. I need someone who hears what people think they said." Her eyes stayed on the child. "That sounds like more than 90 minutes. "It is," he said. "But all I'm offering is a seat. If you come and it's wrong for you, you leave. No apology, no harm." She didn't answer. The captain announced their descent, and the cabin performed its ritual of fastening and collecting and pretending to be ready for landing. Reed slid the packet back into his folder as slowly as a man learning to wait. The child's fever flush had cooled to a steady pink. Camille breathed him down to sleep again in Turkish, and Reed, who employed entire departments to persuade governments to let him treat risk, found that his pulse settled when she spoke. At the jet bridge, the line stalled, and an apologetic wave passed backward, the way small disasters always travel. Camille shifted Noah upright with one practiced arm and folded the stroller with the other. Forgiveness and competence in a single motion. Reed thought of processes with names and budgets that still failed to be as efficient as what she did without thinking. They stood in the terminal's hard light, both pretending to be deciding their separate days. He held out a card. Hotel name, time, nothing else. No title because titles had already wasted too much of both their lives. "You can bring him," he said too quickly. "We'll arrange care." Her head tilted. "You assume a lot." "I listen to lullabies," he said. "It's new." Outside, Boston had sharpened itself on too much glass and not enough mercy. Buses sighed at curbs and made people choose quickly. She tucked the card into a pocket that had seen winter. He felt the foolishness that attends men who have forgotten how to ask for help. "Why me?" she asked. "Because someone had to demand a reason from the universe." "Because you corrected something no one else knew was wrong," he said, "and you did it without needing credit to keep breathing." He watched the answer land in her, not as flattery, but as usable truth. She navigated the bus step with a sleeping child and a bag and a stroller, because not being ridiculous in public was sometimes the only dignity available. The doors closed. The bus lurched. He raised a hand and dropped it. She did not look back. He pretended he had not wanted her to. On the ride into the city, she pressed her cheek to Noah's hair and let the card's rectangle warm against her leg. The practical arithmetic began its familiar march. Daycare windows, money that had to split into thirds and make fourths, clothing that looked like it belonged in rooms that did not. Beyond the glass, Boston mispronounced winter and kept going. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail from the speech clinic. They were sorry to cancel again. Schedules had become a translation no one could make honest. She listened twice, not for content but tone. Then she typed a note to herself in Spanish because it felt braver in that language. Someone opened a door. Don't apologize for walking through it. Morning arrived with its usual hard knuckles. She passed Copley Square on purpose, to put her feet where choices felt heavier. The Fairmont lobby smelled expensive enough to make refusing feel sophisticated. She stepped in anyway. "Ms. Doyle?" the receptionist said. "You're expected." Expected. She tried the word on and found it didn't pinch. She took the elevator and met her reflection in brushed steel. No makeup, a wrinkle mapping a long day across her sleeve. A woman who had learned to make grace look accidental. When the doors opened on the 17th floor, the corridor's beige had 3 dialects. The conference room was already a low conversation in 4 languages and 1 fear. No one introduced her. Reed didn't say her name. He slid a capped pen toward the chair beside him and continued as if the meeting had just become more accurate. She sat. The documents were a brick of parallel columns, English, French, German, with a thinner Turkish packet tucked like an apology. She underlined a say and wrote a toot in the margin, because experimental frightens families in study, allows hope to keep its coat on. When the Hungarian objection said multinational oversight was barred, she opened the statute on her phone and said quietly that the law had amended itself in January. Page 37, paragraph 3. A narrow corridor where everyone was insisting there was a wall. A bottle of water appeared at her elbow midway through the second section, pushed across from Reed without commentary. She drank and kept moving verbs out of the passive voice and into the hands of the people who would live with them. She changed subject to participant, monitoring to care, and a German dürfen to the Können it had tried to impersonate. She did not announce these salvations, she merely made them. By the time the last page flipped, the room had adjusted its angle toward her, by degrees no one named. She gathered her notes and did not stand until after the others left. Reed watched the window watch Boston. His reflection made him look more tired than powerful. "You came without RSVPing," he said, still facing the glass. "I didn't know if I belonged." He turned. "You corrected international law mid-meeting and no one questioned you," he said. "That isn't luck." It wasn't praise, it was a calibration. She felt her shoulders lower by the distance of one adjective. "I need someone who can do what you just did before a misunderstanding becomes an injury," he said. "To contracts, yes, but more to people. I have a son, she said, because truths travel better in pairs. I know, he said. Bring him. He handed her another rectangle. No title, no salary. A time and a city that smelled like old stone trying to be new glass. Zurich, he said. Next Thursday. She took it and felt the Turkish proverb her grandmother used to reach for her mouth. A thread of silk can hold more than a chain if tied at the right time. She closed her hand around the card like a knot. Outside, the city rehearsed its noise. Inside, language had chosen a side. Camille stepped into the corridor, past carpets that tried to agree on color, into an elevator that reflected a woman who had decided to stop waiting to be asked twice. She would bring her son, she would bring her pen, she would bring the exactness that keeps promises from breaking when they become sentences. The Zurich air had a way of making everything feel more deliberate. Footsteps, breaths, even doubt. Camille stood at the sliding glass doors of the Langston Biotech building, her reflection hovering between transparency and refusal. She had been here before, not this country or this company, but this doorway, where the practical and the impossible kept the same address. Noah's small hand in hers squeezed once, his signal that it was okay to go first. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of glass and soft echoes. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. Camille didn't. She only had the card Reed had given her, still warm from being held too often. The receptionist glanced up, took in the child, and then the paper. Her expression changed in real time. From suspicion to confusion, to the precise politeness of someone who just realized she might be speaking to her superior's guest. Mr. Langston said you're expected, the woman said, voice pitched low. 17th floor. Someone will meet you. They didn't. The elevator opened to a hallway where the quiet was a different species than downstairs. This was expensive quiet, the kind that comes from people who believe sound should obey them. Camille followed the hum of voices to a glass-walled conference room. Through it, she saw 6 men and 3 women seated around a table, their attention orbiting Reed. He was standing at the head, one hand braced against the window, the other tracing meaning in the air. When his gaze found her in the reflection, he didn't miss a beat. We'll continue in 5, he said to the room. The conversation didn't so much stop as suspend itself. She opened the door before courage could expire. Reed turned, his face unreadable except for the smallest flicker. Recognition with a hint of relief. Ms. Doyle, he said evenly, as though her presence were protocol. You found us. Your directions were concise, she said, and instantly regretted the edge in her tone. He smiled, the kind of smile that absorbed defiance and handed back composure. They usually work. All eyes were on her now. No one had introduced themselves, no one had offered a seat. Reed broke the stillness by sliding a notebook across the table. Take this one, he said. You'll need to see the text. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command phrased as trust. Camille sat, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing against her ears. The documents in front of her were translations, columns of English, French, German, and Turkish side by side. It was the same trial proposal she had seen on the plane, now in its full, terrifying form. Reed began again. Page 12, line 9, he said. The oversight language is problematic. We can't afford ambiguity on cross-border consent. Someone across the table, Daniel Koenig, according to his badge, interjected. The existing phrasing is compliant. Our legal department confirmed it. Reed didn't look at him. Legal confirmed syntax, not meaning. There's a difference. He turned to Camille. Show them. She felt the weight of everyone's attention like a hand on her back. She found the line, the familiar phrase, authorized national bodies shall have discretion to oversee ongoing data collection. Discretion, she said, tapping the word. In German, Ermessen. In French, Liberté d'action. But in Turkish, you've chosen yetki, which doesn't mean discretion. It means permission. You've given power to the institutions, not the participants. Koenig frowned. It's a legal nuance. No, she said quietly. It's a human one. The room changed temperature. Reed's eyes stayed on her, but his voice addressed the room. Fix it. All languages should align to participant autonomy. Ms. Doyle will verify consistency before the next review. Someone at the far end whispered something in German that wasn't complimentary. Camille heard it, of course, her fluency catching every insult as cleanly as any syllable of praise. She didn't look up from her notes. The best revenge was accuracy. By the time they reached the next clause, Reed's rhythm had steadied into something that sounded like collaboration. He would introduce the problem. She would dissect it. The others would grudgingly follow. Midway through the session, someone passed her a glass of water. She took it without glancing to see who it was. When the meeting finally adjourned, the others filtered out in the slow exodus of people unsure whether they'd just lost or learned. Koenig lingered by the door, pretending to check his phone. "You handled yourself well," Reed said, gathering the papers. "I wasn't sure that was what I was doing," she admitted. "You were," he said. "They just don't have the vocabulary for it yet." The compliment, if that's what it was, landed somewhere between warmth and warning. He looked toward the glass wall. "You've met Daniel." Koenig gave a tight nod. "We hadn't been informed of your consultant's expertise." "Neither had she," Reed said, already moving toward the door. "That's how we find the good ones." Koenig's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "We'll need formal approval before she reviews classified materials." Reed's tone didn't rise. "Then adjust the classification." Koenig left before his expression betrayed him. When the door shut, Reed sat on the edge of the table, arms folded. "You handled him better than most executives I've paid a salary to." She shook her head. "I didn't handle him. I corrected a verb." "Same thing," Reed said. "You just made him realize the verb had been handling him." The line should have been arrogant. Somehow it wasn't. He slid a folder across the table. "This is Zurich's pilot review. Turkish, English, and Hungarian. You'll find inconsistencies in all three. Fix them before tomorrow." Her hand froze on the folder. "You're assuming I'm staying." "I'm assuming you're capable," he said. "You can still leave afterward, if you prefer." She wanted to ask why me, but the answer was already sitting in the way he looked at her. Not curiosity, not charity, but recognition. He saw in her what few people did. Precision, not as caution, but courage. When she finally nodded, Reed's expression softened just enough for her to catch the outline of a different man beneath the structure. The one who had crossed an aisle on a plane for a lullaby. "Good," he said. "Our driver will take you to the hotel. Bring Noah tomorrow. The staff there can watch him during the session." He was halfway to the door before she found her voice. "You already arranged that?" He paused. "I like to remove barriers for people who make my life easier." Then, almost as an afterthought, "He seemed to like dinosaurs. They have a museum wing in the hotel. He'll be fine." Camille stood there for a full minute after he left, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the carpet. She had spent years translating the intent behind men's words, what they wanted, what they withheld. Reed's language was different. He said what he meant, and somehow that felt riskier. That evening, she and Noah walked along the Limit River. He raced ahead, counting ducks in English, then French, then something he'd invented. She let him. The sky was a low watercolor of gold and cloud. For the first time in years, the word tomorrow didn't sound like a deadline. It sounded like a page turn. At dinner, she checked her phone. An email from Reed. No greeting, no signature, just one line. "Precision saves lives. Tomorrow we start with language." R. She smiled despite herself. There was arrogance in it, yes, but also something else. Faith. And that, she decided, was rarer than genius. When Noah fell asleep, she opened the folder and began marking corrections in the margins, her pen whispering across the paper like a promise. Outside, the river kept its quiet rhythm, and somewhere across the city, Reed Langston was likely doing the same thing, building meaning out of silence. The room had the polite hostility of a tennis court, quiet, measured, full of people who mistook restraint for neutrality. 12 name placards, 4 languages, one long table that believed in hierarchy. Reed wasn't there yet. Camille took a chair by the wall like someone auditioning for a role she already knew how to play. Daniel Koenig flicked his pen once and began without preface. "Biomarker clearance under Swiss EU transitional law," he said, gesturing to a slide that wore too much certainty. "Adopt the 2022 phrasing and proceed with the bilateral annex." Camille skimmed the paragraph. felt the drag where meaning caught on an old nail. That's outdated, she said, not raising her voice. The phrasing was replaced in March. Article 27B, new import pathways and a rescoped oversight committee. Koenig turned, the look of a man who had not scheduled interruption. And you are? Camille Doyle. Your role? Keeping your meaning intact. He smiled in a way that tried to be continental and landed on condescension. Legal reviewed this. Legal reviewed a version, she said, sliding the PDF open on her phone. Look here, footnote 14. The German Zulassungsfad no longer maps to your English authorization path. It's now clearance pathway with a participant autonomy rider. If you leave the old term, you'll shift discretion back to institutions when the revision places it with participants. A silence, clean as glass. Someone at the far end muttered in German, derisive. She heard it and didn't carry it forward. Who gave you this document? Koenig pressed. The internet, she said. Then after a beat, and the habit of reading to the last line. The door opened. Reed stepped in without hurry, winter air following him like a second coat. He took in the tableau, the slide, the posture, the question marks stacked around Camille, and didn't ask for backstory. She's the reason we didn't lose Ancora, he said, taking the seat beside her. If you're still waiting for titles, you've already missed the point. He leaned toward Camille, his voice shifting into gentle German. Alles gut? Ja, she answered, matching him. Sie verstehen nur noch nicht, warum ich hier bin. They just don't understand yet why I'm here. He nodded once, then addressed the room in English. Proceed. The liaison from Bern joined by video. Square glasses, square jaw, a manner that had filed its corners. We can accept a bilingual annex, he said, with German governing in case of discrepancy. No, Camille said, before the instinct to be polite could muzzle her accuracy. That creates asymmetry. You can't promise equivalence and then crown a language. It will bleed everywhere. Koenig inhaled, patience whitening his knuckles. German governs Swiss regulation. That's not an affront, it's structure. It's hierarchy, she said, and the hierarchy will show up where you can't afford it. In the consent form, for instance, your German phrasing allows institutional persuasion where the English guarantees the family's right to withdraw. If German governs, you've broken faith. The liaison tilted his head. What do you propose? Parallel texts that check each other for power, and a reconciliation clause that names intent instead of defaulting to a governing language. Name the intent, Reed said, not as a test, but as an instruction. Participant autonomy prevails, Camille answered. Where ambiguity exists, we interpret toward human agency. A procurement lead tried to tuck a vendor exclusivity clause into a footnote, the way children hide contraband under a bed. Camille drew a circle around it. This binds you to a supplier 12 months after the trial ends. If new data says another device is safer, this clause forces you to ignore it. Standard practice, Koenig said. Standard regret, she said, and let the quiet agree with her. They moved through French that wanted to be soft where it had to be hard, Turkish that needed an agglutinative suffix to pin the ethics to the right subject, English that insisted on passive voice like a child hiding behind curtains with bare ankles showing. She kept bringing verbs back into the hands that would hold them. She replaced subject with participant, monitoring with care, changed a German dürfen, may, that had tried to impersonate können, can, no flourish, just repairs. Midway through, a bottle of water slid across the table and gently bumped her notebook. Reed didn't look at her. He resumed making the case for a world in which clarity outranked speed. She drank and kept going. Your annex, then, the liaison said after an hour, English crisping as respect crept in. Draft it, German and English, and we'll circulate. Camille wrote, longhand first, because ink made thought obey. She kept the German muscular where English preferred translucence, and kept English declarative where German could balloon. She read the clause aloud. English, then German, and the room listened with the particular quiet that follows the moment a problem recognizes its solution. That will do, the liaison said. Send. Koenig shifted his papers into 90-degree stacks. We'll need legal to approve. Legal will approve, Reed said, tone flat as a sign check. If they don't, we'll explain it until they do. They broke for 10 minutes that no one seemed to want. People hovered by the glass, by the coffee urns, by her chair. A French delegate asked her to look at a phrase he hated. She swapped prise en charge for prise en soin and watched his shoulders lower by a centimeter. The Hungarian with the blue eyes who had objected on the plane to multinational oversight offered a tight nod. Acknowledgement, not apology. Progress. Koenig approached last. Professionalism arranged like cutlery. You present corrections as inevitable, he said. I present meaning as non-negotiable, she answered. It's difficult to argue that words shouldn't mean what we say. Something in his expression loosened. A micro-surrender. You're not legal, he said, almost curious. You're not operations? What are you? The person who will be blamed if the language fails, she said, so I prefer that it doesn't. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. Understood. The afternoon session brought a parent advocacy group onto the call. A woman spoke in French, her voice carrying the mineral taste of grief, delays, euphemisms, the way documents turn the living into data. The room began to defend itself, polite shields rising. Camille didn't. In our form, she said in French, we will not call your consent an authorization. We will call it a decision. Anywhere the text says, you are permitted, it will become, you choose. If anything reads as if we are doing this to you instead of with you, you can tell me, and I will change it. The woman went quiet for a long count, then said, "Qui êtes-vous?" Someone whose child needs the world to mean what it says, Camille answered. Not metaphor, not melodrama, just a true sentence in a new room. Merci, the woman said, and the connection clicked off. The men at the table looked at their papers like they'd become heavier. By 4, track changes had turned the draft into a bruise of validity. Reed leaned back and let his eyes close for 1 measured second, a luxury he allowed only when proof existed. Then he opened them and looked to Koenig. We're standardizing this across regions, he said. Parallel texts, reconciliation clause, intent prevails. Ms. Doyle oversees language. Koenig didn't flinch. Understood. When the room emptied, Reed stayed by the window while Zurich performed dusk with bureaucratic precision. Camille gathered pages into piles that made private sense. She felt the odd calm that follows a clean fight. You changed the room, he said without turning, and you didn't make it about you. It was never about me, she said. It's about the people who will live under the words. He came back to the table and set a folder in front of her. No logo. Inside a single page, 1 sentence in his exacting hand. I want you to be the voice that reviews every word before the world sees it. She let out a breath that sounded like a draft finding its final noun. Why me? Because you know when a word looks correct but sounds wrong, he said. I've built whole departments around people who don't. That's not a qualification, she said, deflecting to humor, because the alternative was letting belief land where it might do damage. It's the only one I trust, he said, not moving, not selling. You've seen how this works. The wrong suffix, the wrong tense, the wrong passive voice, and we buy ourselves a lawsuit and someone else a harm. I don't need better English. I need better intent. Her hand found the edge of the page, thumb settling into the groove paper makes when it wants to be kept. This makes enemies, she warned. I prefer enemies to preventable injuries, he said. Enlist whom you need. He straightened as if remembering he was also a person with a calendar. Noah? Asleep in the childcare suite, she said, learning the ibex in 3 languages. Good, he said, and something unarmored crossed his face. I checked. You didn't have to. I always check. It should have been nothing. It wasn't. That night, back at the hotel, an envelope waited under her door. Inside, the policy draft translated into 5 languages, the reconciliation clause embedded, her phrasing intact. At the bottom in black ink, a line that tied the day to a principle. Your review matters more than their approval. R. She sat on the bed's edge and let the words take their weight. Through the wall, she could hear Noah's soft sleep sounds, the consonants of the day finally unclenching. She thought of the proverb her grandmother had carried across a lifetime, like a hidden seam. A single silk thread will hold more than a chain if tied at the right time. She looked at the sentence again. Voice, reviews, world. and understood the knot she was being asked to make. Outside, trams stitched the city with patient lines. Inside, she opened her laptop and began building a lexicon for how they would talk from now on. Verbs with shoulders, nouns that didn't excuse themselves, clauses that placed responsibility where it belonged. She didn't wait to be welcomed. She walked through the door she'd left open. The message came on company letterhead, but felt like a whisper slid under a locked door. Her position is not formally authorized within Zurich operations. Please clarify the scope of her access. No signature, no courtesy line, the kind of email written by someone who didn't need to be brave enough to attach their name. Camille read it twice, once as a professional and once as a woman who knew exactly how power hid in syntax. The use of her instead of Ms. Doyle wasn't an accident. It was a diminishment. The phrase scope of her access was bureaucratic camouflage for, we don't like that she belongs here. She closed the laptop without replying. Silence was also a language. By the time she reached the office, the air had already decided what kind of day it wanted to be. Thin, cold, metallic. Zurich had that talent. It could make civility feel like a negotiation. Daniel Koenig was in the corridor, speaking with another manager, his voice all diplomatic honey. When he saw her, he ended the conversation mid-sentence, the universal gesture of someone preparing to be polite in self-defense. Ms. Doyle, he greeted, giving her the tight, professional smile that never reached his eyes. You're early. I had an email to thank you for, she said lightly. I assume it was yours? He blinked. I'm not sure what you mean. Her position is not formally authorized, she quoted, word for word. That one. His smile didn't break, but his eyes did, a flicker of recognition. I simply asked for procedural clarity, nothing personal. Everything about precision is personal, she said, especially when you use it to erase someone. For a moment, the silence thickened. Then, to his credit, Koenig recovered. Look, I respect your work, but you need to understand, this is an institution. It has layers. You appeared without a title, and that unsettles people. She folded her arms. Then they should learn to read better. Titles don't explain function. Language does. It wasn't anger that carried her words, just an exactness he couldn't outpace. Be careful, he said quietly. People like Reed Langston don't often defend outsiders for long. She smiled, and it wasn't kind. Maybe that's true, but I'm not here for his defense. I'm here for the truth of the documents. Those don't answer to anyone's comfort. Then she walked past him, leaving the scent of ink and defiance behind. Reed found her an hour later, sleeves rolled, eyes on the multilingual contracts glowing on her screen. He could tell something had happened. She was editing like someone who'd been insulted in fluent subtext. Your tempo changed, he said. She didn't look up. You get better work from me when someone questions whether I deserve to be here. He took the chair beside her. Koenig? An anonymous note, but his fingerprints are fluent. He considered that for a moment, then asked, Do you want me to intervene? No, she said. Let me translate the situation myself. A small smile ghosted at the edge of his mouth. I expected that answer. He reached into his coat and placed a folded sheet of paper on the desk. Then translate this instead. It was a printed memo marked Internal Directive, pending board approval. At the top, Langston Biotech Global Communication Standards. Underneath, one sentence in plain language. All final documents in every region and language shall undergo review for clarity and human context before release, under the supervision of the appointed Chief Linguistic Ethicist, Camille Doyle. She blinked. Chief? Linguistic Ethicist? I thought consultant was too small for what you're doing, he said, and if someone's going to challenge your authorization, they'll need to take it up with the board. You can't just create titles to solve politics, she said. I can, he said, and in this case, I did. Her instinct was to argue, but the relief betrayed her with a tiny breath. She folded the page once, then again, careful not to crease the words. This will make enemies. It will make progress, he countered. Enemies just come as a side effect. For a second, something almost like laughter trembled between them. But it wasn't amusement. It was recognition, the kind that occurs when two people see the same horizon for the first time. That afternoon, the Zurich office gathered for what Reed called a precision review. Koenig sat 3 seats down from Camille, expression neutral. The documents displayed across the screen were familiar: clauses, compliance, and the ghost of ambiguity. Reed began. Before we start, a clarification. Ms. Doyle's oversight role is now formalized company-wide. All translations and legal language will route through her desk prior to execution. The announcement was clinical, almost dull, but Camille saw the tremor ripple across faces, the subtle tightening of control slipping away. Koenig cleared his throat. With respect, that's an unprecedented degree of authority for an external advisor. She's not external, Reed said. She's necessary. The tone wasn't defensive. It was final. Camille opened her binder. Page 6, she said. Clause regarding cross-border data transfer. The phrase with regulatory consent in Turkish reads as by state authorization. Those are not the same. One implies negotiation. The other assumes control. The fix is with oversight acknowledgement. It restores agency to both sides. Someone tried to protest about efficiency. She interrupted softly, without volume, but with gravity. Efficiency is when people don't have to fight to be understood. By the end of the hour, no one argued with her corrections, not because she'd silenced them, but because her logic left no room for pride to survive. That evening, her hotel room felt different. Larger somehow, as if the walls had decided to respect her too. Noah was asleep, one hand clutching his plush dinosaur. On the desk, a sealed envelope waited. No address, just her name in Reed's neat handwriting. Inside was a note written on the back of a company printout. Your review matters more than their approval. Keep walking through doors even when they're labeled authorized personnel only. They were always yours. Below it, a line drawn in black ink. AR. She traced the sentence with her finger and let herself, for one rare moment, believe it. The next morning, she carried the note folded in her coat pocket, a talisman against bureaucracy. When she passed Koenig in the corridor, he nodded first. Not apology, acknowledgement. That was enough. At her desk, the first document waiting for review was a revised global policy draft. Across its top margin, someone, Reed clearly, had scrawled in bold pen, "Intent prevails." Camille read the line again and smiled faintly. Yes, she murmured half to herself. It does. Then she uncapped her pen, opened the document, and began again, rewriting the world one sentence at a time. Camille had never liked glass offices. They made success feel like surveillance. Every pane reflected someone watching you win or fail, often both. Langston Biotech's Geneva branch was all glass and light, a structure that pretended transparency equaled morality. She sat in her new office, the title chief linguistic ethicist etched discreetly on the door, as if the building wanted to hide the fact that meaning itself now had an owner. The title felt heavier than she expected. Power always did when it came disguised as responsibility. A new folder awaited her on the conference table. Langston Global Policy Draft, V2.4. 10 languages, 4 continents, and one signature missing, hers. Reed entered without knocking, a habit he'd somehow made polite. His coat was open, his pace less exact than usual. He carried the look of a man who'd fought a dozen fires before breakfast. Zurich approved the clause, he said, dropping a paper onto the table. You won, again. It wasn't a fight, she said. It's always a fight, he replied. You just make it look like grammar. She smiled. That's because grammar is war disguised as logic. He studied her a moment longer than was professional. How's Noah? Learning to say hypothesis. In 3 languages, she said. He thinks it means dinosaur. That's close enough for most board members, he murmured. Camille laughed before she could stop herself, and the sound startled them both. For weeks they'd built a rhythm, briefings, revisions, occasional silence, but not laughter. That felt like breaking the fourth wall of something neither wanted to name. She looked down at the draft. They left the autonomy clause intact? They tried to cut it, he said. I told them you'd walk if they did. She looked up sharply. You shouldn't have done that. Why not? You would have. I don't need you defending me, she said. I wasn't defending you, he said quietly. I was defending the work. There it was again. the disarming precision of his honesty. He never flattered. He never softened the truth. It was why she trusted him, and why trusting him terrified her. The following week was a blur of meetings, revisions, and resistance. The more Camille's influence expanded, the more the old order pushed back. Executives began copying each other on every email she sent, pretending it was for visibility. On Wednesday, she walked into a compliance meeting where 6 people spoke at once in 3 languages, all trying to argue that ethics was inefficient. She let them tire themselves out. Then she spoke, calm, low, in unhurried English. "Words are policy," she said. "If the language lies, the system follows." They fell silent. Even Koenig, who had since become her most reluctant ally, nodded. By Friday, the new translation protocol was codified into company law. Every document, from press release to clinical trial report, would undergo linguistic ethics review. It was bureaucratic victory, but it felt like something larger. It felt like proof that precision could be protection. That evening, she found Reed alone in the cafeteria, sleeves rolled, tie abandoned on the table like a truce flag. The room was empty except for the 2 of them and the hum of a vending machine. "I thought billionaires didn't eat here," she said, setting her tray across from his. "I'm trying to remember what normal food tastes like," he replied. "Turns out success dulls the tongue." She raised an eyebrow. "Poetic." "Accidental," he said. "I'm exhausted." "From saving the world or controlling it?" He smiled faintly. "From trying to do one without the other." For a while they ate in silence, the kind that doesn't need permission to exist. After a few minutes he said, "You've changed this company." "No," she said. "I just gave its words back their meaning." "That's the same thing." He leaned back, watching her the way one studies a map they didn't know they'd been using all along. "You realize they quote you now? Intent prevails. It's on half our internal memos." "Then they've already forgotten what it means," she said. He laughed under his breath. "You're probably right." He pushed his coffee aside and looked at her with something dangerously close to sincerity. "Camille, you understand people better than anyone I've met, and you do it without manipulating them. That's rare. I don't want this company to grind that out of you." She looked at him steadily. "And what about you? When was the last time you weren't being Reed Langston, billionaire, savior, CEO?" He paused. "The plane," he said finally. "When you corrected Farfel E to Farfall, that was the first time someone talked to me like a man and not an asset." She felt her throat tighten. "That's because I didn't know who you were." "Exactly," he said. The honesty hung there like fragile glass between them. She stood first. "Good night, Reed." He didn't stop her, but his eyes followed her until the glass door closed. The next morning, her inbox was chaos. Dozens of revisions, approvals, and one email flagged urgent. From Koenig. "Rumor circulating that Reed intends to name you interim head of global operations, while he transitions oversight. Suggest you confirm before the wolves start asking." She froze. That wasn't possible. Reed hadn't mentioned anything of the sort. She grabbed her coat and went straight to his office. He was at the window, phone pressed to his ear, watching the river curve through the city like punctuation. When he saw her, he ended the call mid-sentence. "It's true then," she said. He hesitated. "You heard." "I read," she corrected. "You didn't tell me." "I was going to," he said, "after the board met." "Why me?" she demanded. "You have people with degrees in power. I just correct verbs." He smiled slightly. "And yet somehow everything you touch stops lying." "That's not a qualification." "It's the only one I trust," he said again. Same words as Zurich, but heavier this time. She exhaled slowly. "They'll never accept it." "They don't have to," he said. "They just have to adapt." She stared at him, then shook her head. "You're giving me a crown made of glass, Reed. The first person who throws a stone wins." "Then we'll switch to bulletproof," he said. She almost laughed. "Do you ever stop turning defiance into policy?" "No," he said. "It's the only thing that's ever built anything worth keeping." That night, Camille walked home through Geneva's narrow streets, the lamps flickering on the wet cobblestones. She passed shop windows full of books and clocks and precision instruments. Everything this city worshipped. It made her think of Reed, a man trying to measure truth in units of control. In her hotel room, Noah was asleep again, clutching his toy plane. She sat beside him and watched the slow rhythm of his breathing. The quiet was honest in ways adults rarely managed. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Reed, short as always. Tomorrow's meeting will decide everything. Don't speak like they expect you to. Speak like the words belong to you. She typed back, they don't belong to anyone. That's the point. Then after a pause, she added, thank you for believing in what can't be owned. No reply came. None was needed. She turned off the phone, the light of the city bleeding softly through the curtains. Somewhere out there, Reed was rewriting the rules of his empire. And somehow, improbably, she had become the margin note he refused to erase. For the first time in years, Camille let herself imagine what it would feel like to stop running from her own voice and instead to live inside it. Tomorrow would demand more courage than grammar. But tonight, in the quiet between words, she let herself rest. The morning in Geneva was the kind that forgot to hurry, mist over the lake, church bells stitched into the fog. Camille stepped out of the hotel with Noah's hand in hers, the world quiet enough that even the taxis seemed to glide rather than move. She had declined the driver Reed sent. She wanted to walk. The meeting wasn't until the afternoon, and for the first time in weeks, she felt no need to prepare for war. Noah pointed to the swans drifting under the bridge. Mama, they're like clouds. They are, she said, except they know where they're going. He grinned, the way only children do when their mother says something that sounds like poetry. They found a cafe tucked between a watch shop and a bookstore. Red chairs, striped awning, the smell of butter and rain. The waitress switched between French and English so effortlessly that even Camille smiled at the cadence. Reed arrived late, as he always did when he was thinking too much. No entourage, no assistant, no phone glued to his ear. Just a man in a navy coat, sleeves rolled, carrying the exhaustion of too many precise victories. You walked, he said. I wanted to remember what ordinary feels like, she said. He smiled faintly. And it's quieter, she said, but not simpler. He pulled out the chair across from her. Noah immediately slid a croissant toward him. You can have the messy one. Reed accepted it with the solemnity of a peace treaty. Best offer I've had all week. They ate in easy silence, the kind that only comes after months of words. Reed watched the boy chatter about dinosaurs and chocolate milk, and there was a warmth in his gaze that unsettled Camille. Not because it was new, but because it was unguarded. When Noah ran to the window to count passing trams, Reed said, He's extraordinary. He's a child, she said softly. Children only seem extraordinary because we forget what simple honesty looks like. Maybe that's why I trust him more than half my board, he murmured. She smiled. He'd fire them all by snack time. Probably improve productivity, he said. She laughed, the sound bright against the muted clink of porcelain. Then her expression softened. Why did you bring me here, Reed? Not the company. This, Geneva, this cafe, this morning. He hesitated. Because I wanted to see what you're like when you're not translating the world. That's not possible, she said. I don't know how not to. Maybe, and he said, but I wanted to try. They spent the afternoon at the Musée d'Histoire Naturelle. Noah ran from exhibit to exhibit, shouting facts in 3 languages, each less accurate than the last. Reed followed behind, pretending not to be charmed. Camille lingered by the display of butterflies, rows of fragile wings pinned under glass. They're beautiful, she said, and tragic, captured mid-flight just to prove they existed. Reed looked at her reflection in the glass. You sound like you're describing people. Maybe I am. He didn't answer. Later in the museum courtyard, Noah discovered a small pond where children floated paper boats. Reed bought one from a vendor, handed it to him. Captain Noah, your vessel awaits. The boy saluted gravely and launched it. The boat spun once, caught a current, and began its quiet voyage toward the fountain. Camille watched the scene, the billionaire crouched beside a child's paper boat, and thought how rare it was to see power bend toward gentleness. When Reed stood, his coat caught the light wind. You're staring, he said. Just memorizing, she replied. That evening, Geneva's sky turned to amber. Reed walked her and Noah back to the hotel. The streets were strung with small white lights, their reflections trembling in puddles. They reached the steps, but neither moved to end the night. "Will you be at tomorrow's board session?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "but only to watch. It's yours." She frowned. "Mine?" "You'll lead the language reform proposal. You've earned it." "Reed, I trust you more than anyone in that room," he said, "and I want them to see why." She opened her mouth to protest, but the way he said it, quietly without condition, disarmed her. Noah tugged her sleeve. "Mama, can I show Mr. Reed my drawing?" Reed crouched to the boy's height. "Of course." Noah unfolded a crumpled sheet from his pocket, a child's sketch of 3 stick figures under a sun. One tall man, one woman with big hair, and a small boy holding both their hands. Above it, in shaky letters, he had written "Our flight." Camille froze. "Noah," he grinned. "It's us, Mama, on the plane. When Mr. Reed helped you with the papers." Reed's eyes flickered with something almost painful. "That's accurate," he said softly. Camille folded the drawing gently. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's perfect." When Noah ran ahead into the lobby, Reed said quietly, "He remembers everything." "So do I," she said. They stood there, the hum of the city between them. Then Reed said, almost to himself, "You've made me see what language was always supposed to be. A bridge, not a weapon." "And you've made me see what power can be," she replied. "If it listens." He gave a small, tired smile. "I'm still learning." "Then keep learning," she said. "Just don't ask me to teach you." He looked at her then, not as a subordinate, not as a savior, but as an equal. "I wouldn't dare." Later that night, she found a postcard tucked under her door. It was the one from the bookstore earlier that day, the one she had paused to read aloud. "Some people arrive and make such a beautiful impact. You can barely remember what life was like without them." On the back, Reed had written, "If words are bridges, this is one I won't burn. R." She didn't cry, but she did sit for a long time, the postcard balanced on her knees, the city lights flickering through the curtains like unfinished sentences. The next morning came too soon. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, sunlight cutting across the table like judgment. Reed sat near the window, silent, while Camille took her place at the front. Her palms didn't sweat, her voice didn't tremble. She had fought harder battles in smaller rooms. "Language is not decoration," she began. "It's infrastructure. It carries intent. When we build policy, we build architecture for trust or for collapse." Slides clicked, heads turned. She showed them what careless phrasing cost: misinterpreted consent, misplaced accountability, moral erosion disguised as efficiency. Then she showed them what precision could save: lives, credibility, dignity. When she finished, the silence was heavy but not hostile. One of the older directors, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "You speak as if the words themselves have ethics." "They do," Camille said. "They inherit them from the people who choose them." The woman nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it's time ours started inheriting yours." When the vote passed, Reed didn't smile. He only exhaled, like a man who had been holding his breath for years. That evening, Camille walked alone along the lake. She passed the cafe, now closed, and the bookstore window where the postcard had hung. The reflection in the glass caught her. The woman she had become, shoulders squared, eyes clear. Her phone buzzed once, a message from Reed. "You rewrote more than policy today." She typed back, "You made space for it to exist." No further messages came. They didn't need any. Across the street, church bells began to ring, the same melody that had greeted the morning mist. She stood for a while, listening. The sound felt like a translation she didn't need to make. When she turned back toward the hotel, the lights on the water followed her, rippling and whole, as if the city itself was learning a new language, one she'd helped it remember. Airports are designed for departures, but some mornings they feel like arrivals pretending to wear the wrong jacket. 2 days after the vote, the Geneva sky let them go without protest. On the flight home, Noah fell asleep with one hand in the snack bag and the other on her sleeve, anchoring her to a world that never asked for minutes or metrics. Across the aisle, a man rehearsed a presentation under his breath. Behind them, someone cried in Spanish and then in silence. Camille looked out at the torn cloth of clouds and thought of how the word home had changed its grammar. No longer a noun you point to, but a verb you do. Boston greeted them with February glass and the smell of old snow. In their apartment, the heat clanked on like an apology. She set down the suitcase, carried Noah to his bed, and stood for a moment in the doorway, watching his breath turn into its own small system of weather. On the table lay a stack of envelopes she hadn't had the courage to forward. Clinic schedules, overdue notices, the life she'd kept from unraveling by learning how to count to enough. In the morning, the city resumed its dialect of urgency. Camille made coffee strong enough to teach itself to stand. When she opened her laptop, the screen filled with documents, global drafts from Zurich, press releases waiting for the right noun, consent forms that needed verbs with shoulders. Her title sat quiet in the email signature. Chief Linguistic Ethicist. She decided not to get used to it. Titles had a way of becoming cages when you forgot to leave the door unlatched. The first memo she sent that day set the tone, not in warning but in welcome. Subject: before the words go public, words are not packaging, they are architecture. Please send final drafts for review with context and intended audience. We will check for clarity, agency, and dignity. Efficiency is when people don't have to fight to be understood. She pressed send and felt the strange, light ache that follows the choosing of a path and the refusal to apologize for it. The work arrived like weather, steady, unavoidable. In a French press release about a supply partnership, she moved a sentence out of the passive voice so that accountability would stop pretending to be air. In a Turkish patient information sheet, she changed a suffix that quietly shifted consent from families to institutions. In German procurement language, she replaced dürfen with können to keep permission from masquerading as capability. Small edits, each one a thread pulled taut enough to hold. By evening, her initials dotted documents across 4 continents. She didn't sign them like claims. She signed them like blessings. Noah climbed into her lap with the Korean picture book from Geneva and insisted on the story again. She read slowly, letting her mouth shape the sounds with respect. Halfway through, he interrupted to correct her. He decided a character's name should be different, and that was now law. She laughed and ceded the point. It felt like good governance. A package arrived just before midnight. No return label, no branding, wrapped in the confident minimalism of a person who never needed to prove he could find you. Inside, a single sheet of Langston letterhead and a postcard she recognized from the Geneva bookstore window, the one that had waited for a story to earn it. The letter was handwritten in Reed's exacting black. You said words can be ropes, pulling people closer or holding something steady. I stopped using them to steer and started using them to keep the right things from drifting. Thank you for tying the first knot. R. On the postcard's back, he'd added only a date and a noun, arrival. She set both beside her mother's old lullaby lyrics in the drawer, where she kept things that did not require translation. For a few minutes, she did nothing but breathe, which she realized might be the truest form of reading. The next weeks unspooled into the kind of routine that earns its ordinariness. She built a lexicon for reviewers across regions, plain language checklists that ask questions more than they gave orders. Does the sentence put agency in the hands that will hold it? Does the clause survive being read aloud by someone afraid? Can the document be translated back into kindness without losing accuracy? Compliance teams wrote to say her red lines made negotiations shorter. A hospital liaison in Lyon sent a 3-word email after she changed authorization to decision. Merci. C'est juste. A translator in Ankara asked if she would review his verbs before he sent the next batch, because he wanted them to carry weight without stepping on throats. She wrote back that this was an admirable summary of ethics. And then there were the stubborn hours. A regional lead insisted on a clause that prioritized vendor continuity over patient outcome. She removed it twice and found it resurrected in a footnote. On the 3rd attempt, she scheduled a call, not to argue, but to read the sentence aloud the way a mother would hear it. The man listened, went quiet, and said, "All right, delete it." She didn't celebrate. She made a note. When they hear themselves, most people choose better. At night, when the building settled and the radiators exhaled like old men, she allowed herself one small ritual. She would open Reed's letter and reread the line about ropes. She never answered it. Some communications do their best work without echo. He wrote rarely, and only when the words had a job. A photograph of a conference room whiteboard with her clause, "Intent prevails," pinned in the center by 4 languages in a red circle. A single-line message after a regulatory win. They argued, and then they read, and then they agreed. A question that wasn't about policy at all. "What's the word in French for missing that happens to you?" She replied, "Manquer." He answered, "That one." No flourish, no request. Just the admission that language sometimes names what courage hesitates to. Spring reached Boston like a change of syntax. Same street, new tense. One afternoon, standing in line at the clinic, she realized she hadn't felt the old urgency in weeks. That persistent need to justify her presence in rooms that refused to learn her name. She still guarded her time like a finite resource. But the guarding now felt less like defense and more like stewardship. On a rainy Tuesday, the Langston Global site pushed a small update she hadn't approved because it didn't require her authority. Under the logo, a new line in 6 languages, each meaning identical, each rhythm preserved. Every word counts. She closed the browser, opened it again, and let the simplicity earn its place. "Are we home now?" Noah asked that night, the question he returned to whenever the world changed color. "Yes," she said. Then, because he had taught her to be precise, she added, "And here, home is something we do." He pointed to the postcard on her desk. "That's the boat message." She smiled. "It is." "Can we build one?" he asked. "For the bath?" "2," she said, "in case the first one decides to become a story." They folded paper boats that evening and floated them in the tub, cheering when the smaller one survived a wave big enough to clear the faucet. Later, when the apartment fell quiet and the city performed its late shift of sirens and distance, she stepped onto the fire escape with a blanket and the kind of fatigue no longer sharpened by fear. Her phone buzzed once with a message from an unsaved number she knew as well as her own name. "I reread your first correction today, the one from the plane. We built policy on it without realizing. That's how the true things work, I think. They're quiet until they're foundations." R. She typed and deleted 3 responses, let the compulsion to be equal in eloquence pass, and wrote back, "Foundations don't demand thanks, they demand care. Keep listening." A beat later, "Already am." She put the phone face down, not as refusal but as practice. The sky over the neighborhood water towers was the deep, patient blue of a city telling itself the truth in small ways. In Zurich, a liaison she would never meet used her reconciliation clause to stop a bad habit from becoming a precedent. In Bern, a parent advocacy group read a new consent packet and did not feel erased. In Ankara, a translator chose a suffix that put the decision back in the right hands. None of them knew her face. All of them could feel the adjustment. Camille thought of her grandmother's proverb, the one about silk holding more than chains when tied in time, and finally understood the part she'd missed. The nod is not dramatic, it's deliberate. She went inside, checked on Noah, and sat with the quiet that had learned how to trust her. On the table, a fresh stack of drafts waited like a chorus, asking for a conductor who refused to take a bow. She picked up her pen. Before she wrote, she whispered a sentence that had carried them from aisle to boardroom to balcony and back again. Belong is a verb. Then she opened the first document and began to conjugate it in the only way that lasts. Choice by choice, clause by clause, a life that had finally stopped asking for permission. Across an ocean and some distance more mysterious than miles, a man in a glass office set a postcard by his window and turned his chair to face daylight. He did not text. He did not call. He let the language they now shared do what it does when it's given the chance. Hold steady, point forward, arrive.